Little House Chapter Book, Pioneer Sisters, illustrated by Renee Grafe. We were on Chapter 2, A Trip to Town. In the spring, when the crops were in, Pa said it was time for a trip to town. This year he said Mary and Laura were old enough to go. They were very excited. They had never been to town before. Laura had stared at the wagon track that twisted through the woods, wondering what was at the end of it. Now she would find out. Pa said they would go in a few days. Mary and Laura could hardly wait. They tried to play going to town, but they couldn't do it very well. They weren't sure what a town was like. They knew there was a store in a town, but they had never seen one. Their dolls wanted to go to town too, but Laura and Mary told them, "No, dear, you can't go this year. Perhaps next year, if you are good." Finally, one night, Pa said, "We'll go to town tomorrow." Ma heated water for Mary and Laura's bath, even though it was the middle of the week. Usually bath time came just once a week on Saturday night, but a trip to town was a special occasion. After they were clean and scrubbed, Ma put up their hair in rag curls. She combed their hair into long wisps and wound each wisp on a bit of rag. When all their hair was wound up, they had knobby little bumps all over their heads. When they went to bed, the little bumps poked into their pillows. Mary and Laura were so excited that they didn't go to sleep right away, but finally it was morning. They gulped down their breakfast. Ma took the rags off their hair. She combed so fast that the snarls hurt dreadfully, but it was worth it. Where each rag had been was a long round curl. Mary had beautiful golden curls, and Laura's ringlets were brown. Baby Carrie didn't have rag curls because she didn't have much hair yet. For such an important day, they put on their best dresses. Mary's was a china blue calico. Laura's calico was a lovely dark red. Mary buttoned Laura up the back, and then Ma buttoned Mary. Pa wore his good shirt, and Ma was beautiful in her dark brown dress with the little purple flowers all over it. At last it was time to leave for town. Mary and Laura put on their sunbonnets. Ma put on her hat just as Pa drove the wagon up to the gate. Ma took baby Carrie in her arms and sat next to Pa on the wagon seat. Mary and Laura sat behind them on a board nailed across the wagon box. They were happy as they drove through the springtime woods. Carrie laughed and bounced. Pa whistled his happy whistle. The sun was bright and warm on the road. It was 7 miles to town. They had drove through the leafy woods filled with sweet, cool smells. Laura and Mary saw rabbits flashing past. They spotted some deer peeking out from behind the trees. Then Laura began to see glimpses of blue water, as blue as the sky through the trees. All at once the road came out of the woods. Ahead was a big lake. It was called Lake Pepin, and the town was built on its shore. "There you are, Laura and Mary," Pa said. "There's the town of Pepin." Laura stood up on the board. Pa held her safe by the arm so she could see the town. There were so many houses she could hardly breathe. She had never seen anything like it. Right on the edge of the lake there was one great big building. Pa told them that was the store. It was not made of logs. It was made of wide gray boards running up and down. Behind it was a clearing where all the trees had been cut down. Standing among the tree stumps were more houses than Laura and Mary could count. In all these houses people were living. Smoke rose up from their chimneys. Laura stared. She saw girls and boys playing in the sunshine. She saw someone's laundry spread out to dry on the bushes near a house. She looked and could not say a word. They left the wagon on the shore of the lake. Pa tied the horses to the wagon box. He took Laura and Mary by the hand. Ma came beside them carrying baby Carrie. They all walked to the store. This was where Pa traded his furs. The storekeeper came out from behind the counter and greeted Pa and Ma. Then Laura and Mary had to mind their manners. "How do you do?" Mary said, but Laura couldn't say anything. The storekeeper said to Pa and Ma, "That's a pretty little girl you've got there." He was talking about Mary. He'd admired her golden curls. He didn't say a word about Laura or her curls, which were the color of plain old dirt. The store was filled with things to look at. Kegs of nails, sacks of salt, bags of sugar, big wooden pails full of candy, boots and knives and tools. All along one wall were shelves of the fabric for making clothes. There were all colors of calico, pinks and blues and reds and browns and purples, enough for dozens of dresses. Laura could have looked for weeks. There were so many things to see. She had not known there were so many things in the whole world. Pa and Ma did their trading. They got tea and sugar and cloth for shirts and aprons and lots of other things. And when the trading was done, the storekeeper gave Mary and Laura each a piece of candy. They were astonished. They stood staring at their candies. Then Mary remembered her manners. "Thank you," she said. Everyone looked at Laura. They were waiting for her to speak, but she could not make a sound. Ma had to ask her, "What do you say, Laura?" Laura gulped. "Thank you," she squeaked. They left the store. Mary and Laura looked at their wonderful candies. They were flat and thin, shaped like hearts. Each candy was white with red letters printed on it. Ma read the words out loud. Mary's said, "Roses are red, violets are blue. Sugar is sweet, and so are you." Laura's said only, "Sweets to the sweet." Pa led the way back to the wagon. It was time to eat. Ma had brought a picnic dinner. They had bread and butter and cheese, hard-boiled eggs, and cookies. They sat on the warm sand watching the waves of Lake Pepin curl and slide at their feet. After dinner, Pa went back to the store. Carrie fell asleep in Ma's arm. Laura and Mary ran along the lake shore picking up pebbles. There were no pebbles like these back at the big woods. They had been rolled back and forth by the waves until they were polished smooth. When she found a pretty one, Laura put it in her pocket. Each pebble was prettier than the last. Soon she had filled her pocket full. Pa called out, "It was time to go home." Laura ran back to the wagon, her pebbles bouncing in her pocket. Pa picked her up and tossed her into the wagon, and then a dreadful thing happened. The heavy pebbles tore her pocket right out of her dress. The pebbles clattered all over the wagon box. Laura began to cry. She had torn her best dress, but Ma said it could be easily fixed. She could sew the pocket back on, good as new. "Pick up the pretty pebbles, Laura," Ma said, "and next time don't be so greedy." Laura gathered up the stones. Pa teased her about taking more than she could carry away. Nothing like that had ever happened to Mary. Mary always kept her dress clean and neat. Mary always minded her manners. Mary had lovely golden curls, and her candy heart had a poem on it. Mary looked very good and sweet sitting on the board next to Laura. Laura didn't think it was fair. But still it had been a wonderful day. Laura thought about the wide blue lake and the town and the store full of so many good things. She held her pebbles carefully in her lap as the wagon jolted homeward through the big woods.